You know what time it is? Time to
Come
make
all
some
you
corn mash.
moonshiners if you want to hear about the kind of booze that they serve around here. Made way back in top of them hills.
Well, welcome back to Barley and Hops. I'm George. Yes, this is the channel, of course, that dares to unlock the mysteries of home distilling. If you like the videos, please, and all the video series, please just subscribe, share us with your friends. It costs you absolutely nothing. We're always glad you're with us. Now, today we're going to talk about making a corn mash. Okay. Now, I thought it's necessary, it's important to kind of cover something in about the next 30 seconds or so, so please stick with us. And that is the balance of making a mash and then running your still. You should apply this to your entire process. Now, whether you're making beer, wine, whiskey, bourbon, gin, vodka, any of those things, if you follow these basic principles and you don't violate the principles, chances of success are really, really high. They're astronomical. A failure to do so invites failure. Let me explain. I always use the three-legged stool as the example, okay? Because everybody can picture, you can visualize a three-legged stool where each leg has an identifier. We have ingredients, process, and equipment. Of those three things, please don't shortchange on any of them. Should you shortchange on your ingredients and shorten that leg, what happens? Yes, well, the stool will tip over. You're now unbalanced. If you shortchange on process or equipment, the same thing would take place. Now, what are we talking about? Ingredients, you're talking about the corn, your barleys, your sugars, your base products that you're going to make your mash, your lees, your wort, whatever it is you're going to make. Make sure that you're using proper ingredients, you're using quality. Don't use inferior products because you'll wind up with an inferior result. The equipment. If you're using equipment that you have fashioned yourself, if it's a quality product, a quality piece of equipment, you already know it's going to work well. I'll give you an example. Equipment is important. You can use a hammer to drive a nail, or you can use a rubber mallet. See, we can understand right off the bat, a hammer is going to do a much better job. Your rubber mallet will probably start to drive that nail, but you're going to run into problems. But they are both hammers. Okay, so make sure you're using the proper equipment that is designed to do the job you intended to do. Process. Just throwing a bunch of stuff into a kettle and turning the heat on doesn't necessarily equal a sound process. Follow the guidelines. They're not that difficult. Go through our video series and you'll see how to run a still, how to track temperatures, what are the proper temperatures. As a matter of fact, I've been accused of geeking out and going too much in depth. And people say I talk too much. But I want you to have all the information you could possibly have in order to make you successful. So just make sure your process is sound. If you can do all three of those things, you maintain a balance, and the chances are, more than likely, you will succeed. Now, on to the topic of today. All right, that's 25 pounds of corn already ground up. And you'll notice that what I did was, it gets a little dusty, or it can get a little bit dusty, depending on how coarse or how fine you're trying to grind. So I just put a plastic bag over top, cut a hole in it so I could just capture, actually put like a skirt there just to keep that from being all dusty. Now, let's bring this over here and show you what we have. You see, now I have a ground up corn that's not quite a dust, but then again, it's also not large pieces. So, and I've got that down to about 3/16 of an inch in size. Let's, yeah, as you can see where I've got plenty of corn there. And in all this white, this dusty portion is the germs of the corn itself and the internal portions of each corn kernel. So that is beautiful. So that'll make a good product. Now I've got 25 pounds of this. Okay, I'm going to leave this up here because this is probably one of the more important basics for anything that we do. Now we know in order to ferment and to get a mash or a wash, it really doesn't matter, a wort or the wine, amylase. You need sugar, you need water, and you need yeast. And believe it or not, this is where we tend to get confused. We know where we can get sugar from. We can use table sugar, or we can use corn sugar. Oh gosh, there are many, many different varieties because, you know, sugar is glucose, fructose, or sucrose. Those are the three basic sugars. But in order to get sugar out of my corn, what I need to do, because we know that corn is laden with starch, we need to convert the starch to fermentable sugars. And what do we use to do that? Yes, there's an enzyme, okay? Now you can acquire that enzyme three different ways, all right? You can either germinate the corn kernel, which is moisten it, allow it to start to sprout, and then stop the germination process. And now it already has amylase resident inside the kernel to continue to convert the internal portions of it into fermentable sugars. That's a long process, but that works, okay? That's sprouting your own corn. You could use the amylase that is resident in a malted grain, which we will be using. This is 2-row barley. And it's malted barley, and that has a high diastatic power, which means it has a lot of enzymes in it. And we can use that to convert the starches, or we go out and purchase a small bottle of alpha amylase, and we can use that. And that's about 1/3 of a teaspoon per gallon. So it doesn't take a whole lot in that concentrated form. So what we need to convert our starches into fermentable sugar. Okay? Now, in both cases, in the preparation phase, in order to liquefy, it's called saccharification. To saccharify, because first we have to hydrolyze, which is really liquefy, and then we have to saccharify. We go through liquefaction and saccharification. When we get to the saccharification portion, which is to convert the starches into fermentable sugars, we need water. We need water to liquefy, and we need water to go through the saccharification process. Now, what's really important is that water plays a key role, plays a critical role in both liquefaction, saccharification, and fermentation. See, where we shortchange normally, a lot of us, what we will sacrifice is water for volume. And what I mean by that is we get this idea that, well, if I put more water in, I'm actually diluting my alcohol. Well, you're not going to make additional alcohol, but you've got to have an environment that creates the alcohol to start with, okay? Your yeast eating the fermentable sugars. It's like saying, well, if I'm going to go run a marathon, I want all the energy stored in my body. I don't want to drink a lot of water because I don't want to dilute the energy. Well, you still need the water to help provide you a means to circulate that energy. It's the same thing with yeast. You need water. Okay, you need water for liquefaction, you need water for saccharification, and you need water for fermentation. So please do not ever shortchange. If at all possible, if you're going to err on the side of caution and use more water. You can't go wrong with more water, but you can definitely run into problems with not enough water. What happens if we don't have enough water to convert our starches to fermentable sugars? We wind up with a whole bunch of additional starches left over and very little sugars. And then what do we blame that on? Oh, I don't know. We call somebody. They'll call me and say, George, it didn't work. Well, all I can tell you is you need to make sure you use an adequate amount of water. And my rule of thumb for corn to water is about 1.5 pounds per gallon. 1.5 pounds of corn per gallon of water is more than adequate. More is better, of course. Less is not good. Go figure. If by chance we get to the saccharification portion and a lot of our water has dissipated, as in it's flown away as steam, and it's vaporized. All we have to do is add a little bit more water, okay? So don't shortchange yourself there. And then at the very end, when we get to the fermentation process, and this is down the road, of course, because we got a lot of work to do, but when we get down the road, how do we tell the difference at that point? Well, a good rule of thumb is anything above about 15% alcohol by volume in your mash, potential alcohol, measured with a hydrometer, should send up warning signs that you're probably short a little bit of water. Okay? Now these are all general terms, okay? So keep that in mind, that there's no precision at that point. It's a general term. All too often, we'll shoot for the highest alcohol by volume, and we wind up with a stuck fermentation. Now, it'll ferment for the first 2 or 3 days and then stop. And for some reason, you can't, your hydrometer will tell you you still got 6 or 8% potential alcohol by volume, but your yeast have just given up. Well, they've given up because they've run out of water. So that can tend to happen as well. So, water seems to be the most critical ingredient of all of them are important, but water seems to be the catalyst to make kind of like everything work. All right, let's move on. We're going to grind up our 2-row barley, and 2-row barley is nothing more than barley that has been sprouted by a maltster. It's been brought up to the proper temperature. It's been wet, brought to the proper temperature to sprout, and then it's gone through a drying process which halts that sprouting process. The ends have been knocked off and it's been packaged. So we now have to do the same thing to this that we did to the corn. We have to grind it down so that we can get at it. Let's set that up. Now we're going to grind this the same way that we did the corn. We're going to get it down to as small a particle as we can without turning it into a dust. And you'll see that I've got this down to just like, it's a lot, well, it's probably twice as coarse as a cornmeal, which is probably the best way to describe that. Now I'm going to use 10 pounds of 2-row barley. I've got 25 pounds of corn, 10 pounds of 2-row barley, which is probably 2 pounds more than necessary, but I want to make sure I have enough. And plus there are some fermentable sugars that are inside that barley as well. So I've just wrapped the bag around here. I'm going to collect every bit of it. Okay, well, we're getting ready. We've got corn. I've got 25 pounds of corn already crushed, ground down. I've got 10 pounds of 2-row barley. And I've got these 3 containers, and these may be familiar to you. This is that 19-liter still. I'm running this on 220 volts, 240 volts. I've got 2 other heaters when I'm heating up the maximum amount of water I possibly can. That's for the next video. Happy distilling.